From Mateusz Gamrot predicting an early end to the fight, to Alexander Hernandez calling it a really tough match to predict, the MMA world is completely divided between Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira. Michael Chandler said it best by describing the fight as an absolute treat for the fans. He thinks that both of these guys are very well versed in grappling and wrestling exchanges. And when it comes down to it, he thinks that it's going to turn into a knockdown, drag-out slugfest of a match. But Iron Mike seems to favor Benny over Oliveira. Now, the thing is that both men have been on an absolute tear in the division. Charlie's one of the most dominant fighters in the division in recent history. His story is great too. I mean, he was written off, but he came back, found his footing, and cemented himself as a phenomenal fighter, winning back-to-back fights against the likes of Tony Ferguson, Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje. Tell me that isn't impressive. Those are all some of the best lightweights in the world right now. Of course, he was stopped short in his tracks by the reigning champ, Islam Makhachev himself. Dariush, on the other hand, has accrued an impressive record himself. The man is a monster right now. Ever since he lost to Alexander Hernandez back in 2018, he has been unbeaten for 8 consecutive fights. And I'm talking about UFC's flagship division here, guys. He's been fighting some of the most dangerous men on the planet, and he's been dominating them. But the last man he lost to thinks that Oliveira is going to win this one. Hernandez admitted that it's a really tough call to make, though, so he's only slightly leaning toward the Brazilian. Mateusz Gamrot has a slightly different take on the fight. He thinks that Benny is going to completely rip through Oliveira, and that he's going to finish DuBronx before the time runs out. Now that's a really bold prediction, but the thing is that Dariush taught Gamrot a lesson when they met in October last year. So for that, the Polish fighter favors his former opponent and respects him for what he did in the octagon when they first met. He even thinks that no one deserves the title shot more than Benny at the moment. So it's only right that he wins the fight to finally get that chance against Makhachev. Speaking of former opponents, even Gaethje has expressed his opinion on what's going to happen. The highlight thinks somewhat little of Charlie. He said that Benny causes a lot of damage on the canvas, and that he'll have an edge if the fight goes to the ground. Now, I know Oliveira is a submission artist, and there are countless moments where he sneaked in a submission when he wasn't getting beaten. But the thing is that Dariush isn't afraid to grapple with him. Gaethje compared him to Islam and how he followed DuBronx to the ground and finished him there. Justin predicts that something similar might happen at UFC 288. That's nothing new for Oliveira, though. He has been doubted for years, and yet he has somehow found an opportunity to finish his fights. Just think back to what happened in his fights against Gaethje and Poirier. The Brazilian was getting beaten down mercilessly by these brawlers, but he kept his cool, and when he saw the chance, he took it without hesitation. He submitted both of his former enemies from a deficit. I mean, that's why he's the best finisher in the history of the UFC. But he did get submitted himself by the reigning king of the division. That's a blemish on his record, if you ask me. Islam never looked in danger of submission when he was fighting Oliveira, and there couldn't be a better story for him than finishing the best finisher in the UFC. Islam right now is waiting for a fighter who can actually challenge him for the title, since he already defeated DuBronx once. He's not all that interested in fighting him again. But the thing is that this matchup between Oliveira and Dariush will determine the #1 contender for the division. And even though Islam wishes that Benny could win just so he has someone new to fight, the outcome isn't in his hands. The champ thinks that the Iranian-American is a good fight for him, because he can match him in striking as well as grappling. So it'll be an interesting fight for the fans. He personally believes that Dariush deserves the title shot, but he's obviously open to facing Oliveira again if he performs well at UFC 288. Things will take a weird turn if that happens, though. That's Chael Sonnen's take on this. He thinks that Benny deserved to fight for UFC gold right now, period. He didn't have to go through DuBronx to earn that, because he always did by winning 8 fights back-to-back. The bad guy is of the opinion that there's no one else in the division that has gone through what Dariush did. And in no world does it mean that he isn't already the #1 contender. Sonnen also said that the UFC is making a huge mistake by benching Makhachev for so long. The champ already made them good money in his last couple of fights, and instead of sitting him out, the promotion should be making him fight as soon as possible. They already know that he can bring huge numbers in pay-per-views. So it's just weird that Islam is kind of being punished because there's no one in the division to challenge him. And he's absolutely right about that. I mean, the UFC flew Oliveira to Perth, Australia for UFC 284. He was sitting ringside during Islam's fight against Alexander Volkanovski. And Uncle Chael expected him to challenge the Dagestani for the title once again after the fight. But he was disappointed to see that the Brazilian never got up and called Makhachev out. Why else would Dana White want him there? Islam has always had a problem with getting fighters to agree to face him in the octagon. Whatever may be the reason behind it, it seems that things haven't really changed even after he became champion. Volk was the first one to call him out, and Khabib's protege flew to his backyard to fight him. And even with guys like Oliveira and Dariush, they would rather fight each other and see where things go than challenge the king himself. Of course, you and I have been led to believe that the winner between these two would go ahead to fight for the title. But for now, let's just see how things play out first. In the meantime, though, Benny had a lot to say about his next opponent. While talking to the Schmo, he confessed that he was a little pissed at Charlie. He explained that they should have done this fight in early March, so that he could have had some time off after that, because he wanted to be around his family a little more. Right now, he's training, obviously, and has to focus largely on his training, his diet, etc. Dariush already revealed that he's ready to face DuBronx. He's preparing for 3 rounds just in case. But he expects to finish off Oliveira before that, and he's going to dominate every single minute of the fight. It might not be as easy as Benny's making it sound, though. In the past, you all know that DuBronx has had a brawler approach to his opponents. This time, things won't be the same. Oliveira said he'll be like a lion hunting, so you can expect him to be a bit more strategic inside the octagon. Of course, those are just words right now. We'll have to see how things play out on the night. Those have been all the predictions for Oliveira versus Dariush.